Really excited to have with me Renn Vara. Renn Vara is co-founder of SNP Communications and is a leading coach on the topic of communication in general. Welcome to the show, Renn.
Thank you, Richard. Glad to be here.
We were really excited to have you last year at our Scale Up GC conference. We put on a whole ton of sessions about legal topics, and the one that people really came away with the most takeaways from was your session on communications. And so we thought today we could talk a little bit about the importance of communication, and specifically for in-house counsel, how they can drive an advantage at work by being someone who can talk and communicate well.
Totally.
Tell us just a little bit, Renn, first, how you got into all of this and how is it you've ended up doing what you do?
Yeah. Stupidity. Let's be clear on what happened. My wife and I, we moved from New York City to San Francisco in 1989. And I decided to launch a company at that moment because I'd made a promise to myself I would do that. So you think about that, the confluence of that. I'm landing in Silicon Valley in 89. I knew nothing about tech. And I decide in my naivety, let's create a company. And so I did that. And what I ended up doing, and my wife and I ended up doing, is we just literally lived the life of the tech world. And we just got referred and so I really credit the amazing human beings that we had the privilege to work with back in those days who just keep perpetuating us. And just so you know, Richard, every day I'm always going, they still pay me. So I'm still shocked by that truth. Yeah, but that's how we got started. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Tell us a little bit about Silicon Valley in the late 80s. I mean, obviously things have changed a bit, but what was life like back then?
Well, listen, I started working in Europe very deeply around 2014, 2015, and we got slapped in the face with some very important, realistic business issues like a contract, like a statement of work, right, and all that. In the early days, literally, this is what happened. We'd be in a room with a founder or a CEO, and he would say, look, we got this problem. We really want to fix this. What would you do? And I'd say, hey, I can fix that. How much? And we would just name it. We'd throw a number out and then just shake his hand or her hand. And off we'd go, right? That was literally the way it was done for at least the first 10 years. Imagine how that misteaches you. Like so when we found ourselves in Europe, in the UK, Berlin, Copenhagen, and they were going, okay, give us a contract. It's like, what? We honest to God didn't know what that was. So the significant difference was there was a great amount of courage, maybe naivety, right? Let's try it. And so there wasn't a lot of maturation. And for the right or the wrong of it, my wife we've been mistrained by that immaturity, frankly. And so we still live in that world and always wonder, why are we doing a contract? That's the significant difference.
Awesome. You've worked directly with a lot of executives, well, actually across the world in Silicon Valley and beyond, and in Europe, and folks who have gone on to found billion-dollar companies. Why is communication so important for them?
Okay, so imagine you're coming, first of all, you're doing technology and you lean very heavily on people that are more introverted. They're more into the work, right? They don't really spend their time being chatty, right? So that became from the very beginning, actually, became a huge issue that we had to jump on the middle of, not knowing that that's what we were jumping into, that there was these people. So if you imagine that tech is foundationally based on a group of people that sit coding, right? That goes all the way up to the founders, the tech founders, the CEOs, and all that. We happen to be jumping in the right industry at the right time with the industry. The communication issue is actually paramount. Think about it, you're having to pitch a dream to money people. My God, that's how you start. You have to pitch a dream. That takes some amazing skills. And thank God we've had the privilege of being a part of that, for 30 plus years now.
It's really interesting being a founder and hearing that as well. I remember the early days where it's just two of you. So you don't actually have to be a great communicator, and then it becomes 5 and you start to learn that this becomes really important, and then 100 and so on and so forth.
That's right.
It's interesting for us. I mean, we spend a lot of time working with lawyers, and I sometimes feel like lawyers have that slightly techie profile. I'm a lawyer, but introverts are people who are technically very thorough, very detail minded. In your experience with lawyers, do you see a similar pattern, or are there kind of other challenges specific to that profession that you see?
I think there's other challenges, and one of them is the risk mitigation. If you're a counsel inside of a business, all you're seeing is a tremendous amount of risk that's happening around you. And so that's hard not to be distracted by that risk and then overly respond to that risk. To a founder who's a dreamer or a visionary, or, they don't like people saying no. So if you're in that world, it makes it really challenging. But I would say this, in my experience, the role of being attorney or role of being internal counsel is, I've said this before, and I think I've even said it to your team when I was speaking to them. To me, that is the most important position on that C-level team with the founder, period. Because they are helping that founder navigate some pretty risky situations when what we're in the room, we're in the world-changing business of trying to do something that's never been done before. And by definition, you're walking right into a world of risk, right?
And it's those really risky times where the lawyer really comes to the fore. And so I remember, when I was a lawyer, you're kind of often in the business of saying no, right? And it's kind of your main job is to figure out what you shouldn't do. But of course, in the in-house world, it's a little different where you've got to enable the business. So you've got to actually help them make decisions. What are the kind of typical pitfalls here? So if you're an in-house lawyer and you've got a difficult topic to broach with your CEO, how do you go about this in a way that's really effective?
Okay, so there's a couple of levels to this, right? So let's go to the very simple level. I think as counsel, you need to live in what I call an operating system of no. And what I mean by that is that you have structures, because you need rails, because you can get sucked into about a million things and get overworked and you can't ever deliver on anything. So live in an operating system of no, but live in a yes world when it comes to service. Okay. So if I am now as a counsel, my job is to try to go to a founder, understand a few things. First of all, founders hate the idea of being judged. And if they see it on your face, they see it, that drives them crazy. And people wonder why all of a sudden they get pushed out of the room. And it's because for a moment, it's just a ping like that the founder feels judged. And so they don't want people in the room that are judging them. They want people that believe what we're doing. They're in the gig, right? So what I say to counsel is, you come to be understood. You've trained to do that, right? But you have to understand that the human need of the founder is to be understood. So you have this problematic problem. I am a counsel. My job is to give you information. So you need to understand me, but you have to first begin with understanding the problem. Have the founder feel heard. Have that founder feel like, okay, you understand the problem. Now you can just hit them right between the eyes with the risk issues, the steps we need to take. But if they don't feel understood, if they feel judged by you, all bets are off.
It's really interesting being both a lawyer and a founder, right? So I have this kind of duality.
I
think about this a lot. But in our conference, you had our general counsel up on stage, and he was kind of the guinea pig. And this was an amazing session. And it was kind of some of it was about how you say no, because when you've got to say no, you got to say no, because there's some business critical risk. But what's a good way of actually saying no to your boss?
Okay, so bear with me on this one because it takes a few steps. I think the first thing you have to do is you have to really truly come in curious, seeking understanding. What problem are you trying to solve here? And then make sure they understand that you've truly heard them, which means you have to follow with these how and what questions. Let's assume we did that. What would happen next? Okay, how would you see us moving forward on that? And you have to do that very non-judgmentally, right? The third step then is you repeat back to them what you heard, non-editorially. Okay, so what I hear you saying is, you need to figure out this with these 3 steps in order for us to get to why. And then they say yes. And here's where it gets really interesting. Now you ask for permission. And you simply do this. You go, would it be helpful for me to kind of walk you through how I see that and maybe even show you some of the risk of taking that step? What do you think? And the human being that goes, sure. They open their ears now. For that 1 second, their ears are actually open. And you've asked permission. Now, some people push back on me on this because they feel it feels contrived a little bit. So find your own way of wording it, but understand they have to, founders, as you know, as a founder, you're a bit of a control freak. I control my environment. I predict my world, blah, 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 all that. So give me the opportunity to say, sure, let's hear it. Then you can just pounce on it with actually no hesitation. You can say, look, bottom line is this sinks the business, this corrupts our customers. Frankly, we're screwed, right? You can do it that harsh, and they will actually be okay with it.
So
Does that sound right?
what? Yeah, I think so. I really like that. So what's a kind of how do you recommend to formulate that permission seeking? Like, what's a good way of phrasing that doesn't immediately kind of feel awkward?
Yeah. Well, it could be because you have a good relationship with them. Don't ask permission. Just go, okay, I've heard you. Look, here's our problem, right? That's all you have to do. So it's the idea of, if you understand philosophically this idea, everyone must feel heard and must feel understood. If they don't feel that and hear that, wars are built on this problem. They always talk about the idea of revolutions come from not from down below, but they come from an elite group who feel put out. And then that elite group funds that underground to tear up the system, right? That same thing's true inside of a company. If I don't feel heard and I feel understood, you're going to create a problem. And that's when I work with founders all the time. I'm always going to look, listen to the team. Doesn't mean you have to agree. And you can always do that, say, I hear you, and you now feel heard. Here's the decision, right?
It's definitely something we hear a lot from the lawyers we work with, because they're in scale-up companies. So the company's moving really, really fast. And so just having the room to be curious and to do some discovery and understand often feels like you don't have that room. But, as you say, you're getting burned down the line. And one of the things that is really curious in our recent survey is, a lot of GCs are not allowed in the room, especially in Europe. So we see a lot of cases still with this happening. Like, what should these people be doing to kind of be more heard? I mean, beyond that permission seeking, what kind of tips do you have?
I think you've referenced this before. One of my great, and I never normally don't say founders' names and all that, or general counsel's names, but I have to do a call out for Belinda Johnson, who was chief counsel at Airbnb, and I was just amazed by this amazing leader, because what she did is she came from working for Mark. What's his name from? I'm forgetting his name now. The great founder of founders, Mark, who
Zuckerberg.
did Dallas. Yeah. So she worked with him. Imagine this. She worked in his crazy world for a long time. And then she joins the Brian Chesky crazy world, right? And yet she was this amazing person that she understood one thing, and that was, he will not work with me if he doesn't trust me. And how did she build trust? She lived in his world a little bit. She just non-judgmentally, hey, let's go. Let's have a good time. Let's learn. She laughed. She enjoyed him. And he saw that enjoyment. And then when it came time, she could actually have a very harsh conversation with him, which she did over the issue of governments. Think about Brian. Brian was working more in that kind of world of Uber, right? Take on the government, take on the hotels, right? It was Belinda Johnson who got him to change his mind about that. And I think I can say that out loud. Brian would not be upset that I'm saying that out loud. But it was Belinda who did that. She made him rethink it and go, work with them, Brian. Work with cities, work with hotels. And that fundamentally made a difference with who Airbnb is today versus maybe other companies that didn't do that. And that was because Belinda built trust first. She knew she had to understand him in order to really become that great counsel. That's hard work, but at the same time, it's essential work.
And the value of that decision is enormous, into billions and billions of dollars, probably, based on that really subtle kind of shift. I mean, what do you see when your clients come to you, working with counsel, or actually any executives? Like, what are the common kind of issues they come to you with regarding the team dynamics? I'm thinking specifically in the exec teams. Like, do you see conflict breaking out? Like, what are the things you hear?
Totally. Sometimes it's not that dramatic, actually. It could just simply being that they've reached the point in the business where they feel like there's tension or they're not being understood. What I love, though, mostly what happens is we get brought in by a founder. It's generally a founder who's pointing fingers at others. And we know at the moment, okay, he's pointing, let's find out what's really going on. And so at some point it lands in this place going, you know what? You think they're the problem? You're the problem. So we have the same thing. We have to become trusted by them and non-judgmental to be able to say that to them. That idea of the fish stinks at the head. If you got problems in the machine, look at yourself first, because that's probably where it's coming from. So it generally begins first by pointing fingers. We have these problems that, he's a problem, she's a problem. And then when we get in, we have to do this flip with them And thank God we've been able to do that successfully for many years. And then and what's great about founders is founders are generally very good learners. Like they take the feedback because they've got no choice. They live in a very real world. And so if all of a sudden you say to them, you've got to improve 1, 2, 3, rarely do I get a founder go, well, I don't think they don't do that. They generally go, okay, how do I do that? And they generally eagerly embrace the change. Where C-suite people and GCs find them having difficulty is it goes to the same thing. Look at yourself. Did you build trust? Did you seek understanding? Do you really understand who this founder is? If you can't answer those questions really non-judgmentally, I would argue that the GC's got the problem.
It's such an interesting thing. I mean, thinking about GCs, obviously when you're trained up as a lawyer, you're trained not to make mistakes, right? So, it's a really big deal. When I was a lawyer, we'd do 1,000-page documents. If there was a typo on one page, it's like a really big deal. And so you learn how to avoid, making mistakes and control risk. And in some of those scenarios you're mentioning, it sounds like, you're actually kind of giving quite a lot of yourself. Like you're making yourself quite vulnerable in those cases. Like how do you get people to adapt that mindset to kind of embrace, it's okay to make some mistakes and be human?
Experimentation. If they, if I can get them to say, try this one time, just try this with them and see, or with her, and see what happens. And generally most, think what you just described. For a human being to go through school, to learn to be that detailed oriented, that's not a stupid person. That's a very smart person. And so if they try the experiment, it works, right away their brain goes, damn, that was good. And then it's more experimentation. It's like anything in life. I've developed new habits. How do I do that? I simply change what I'm doing. And over time, if I continue that same behavior, all of a sudden my mind seems to understand. Right.
One of the things I was really struck by looking back to my legal education was how this, well, at least for me, wasn't really taught at all. So, you're taught all the technical stuff, but you get 10 years into your career and you kind of know 95%, and you want to get from 95 to 99 or wherever you want to get to. But like actually these sort of, let's call them softer skills, become so much more important. If you were like professor at law school, professor of communication, what would you be teaching back then? Like what are the really important kind of fundamentals?
Well, active listening is probably the most important thing to teach. But I also think, I think I do a bit of a charm school. There's like, being likable is so important. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean you have to be phony or be, the idea of nice and kind. Don't be a mat where everybody walks on you, but be kind, be in the moment, and understand that the most important thing you do when you meet someone is how you make them feel. That's actually much more important than the information you convey. So if you understand that, and that's a hard thing to understand, particularly if you've invested all those years in the legal, maturity, and now you're asking me to be likable, I would somehow put in there this idea of active listening, likability, and then there's some structural issues to that active listening and that idea of understanding, non-judgmental. That all should be in there. Now, I would say this, in my MBA program, this was a big part of the MBA program, right? And what you're talking about with counsel, it's the same thing with doctors, the bedside manner problem. Because there's such technical information that they've got to get across to a group of human beings, that for them to put that on the side and hope that maybe once you get into the profession, you'll find somebody and learn it. I can understand why they make that decision.
Yeah, it's certainly. I mean, I did an MBA. I've got my 10-year reunion on Saturday. And back then, I remember almost everyone I've spoken to since said the most valuable class was organizational behavior, which was communication, human understanding. And you just see this, time and time again. And it's something which I just wish law schools would, readily embrace because for all the reasons we've just been talking about.
Yeah. But Richard, can I add to that though? I think actually, because I'm in this really weird stage of my life where I'm reading everything. I've just become this history person, philosophy. I've just gone crazy, right? And where my head goes is like, why are we teaching this in middle school, in high school, all the way up through university? Because my God, this idea of understanding motivation. If you can just understand human motivation, why are people driven to do what they do? Why do they conclude what they conclude? Why do they react the way they react? My God, man, everything in life is predicated on that. And yet we never teach anybody. People have to wait till they're, my age. All of a sudden they do some reading. They realize, oh my God, if I'd only known. So I don't hold the law schools out. I think it's a societal problem. We don't respect
It's a bigger
history,
thing.
particularly in the U.S. I mean, the U.S. we don't respect civic norms. We don't history, philosophy. It's something you get on your own, but it's you get it on your own critically late in life.
Yes,
I don't know if you
but
agree.
by which time it's not that it's too late, but you may be well into your career already.
Yeah, that's it.
Obviously, huge amount is happening in AI in the world. Legal is no exception to that, and there's a lot of fear around what's going to happen in like 10 years. But one of the things that's kind of struck me is like the things we've been talking about are just going to become more and more important. So someone at our conference said, it's going to be EQ that's going to win out over IQ because regurgitating the law and basic problem solving kind of going to be commoditized. Like,
Yeah.
how are you? Like, what are you hearing from your clients on this? And kind of, how should folks be future proofing themselves for this new AI age?
First of all, I don't know if you can. I mean, because nobody really knows. I mean, even the greatest experts are not quite clear on what this really means. But I would say this: very different than maybe even 2 years ago. Everybody we work with is embracing this unknown. They're embracing it. They're jumping in, right? And one of the things I do is, anytime I'm back in San Francisco, I do a walk and talk for about an hour or 2 hours with this amazing AI engineer out of DeepMind and out of Google. And this guy is brilliant. And he insists this is his major point about AI. He says, there's a lot of fear. I get it, right? But he said, what people don't realize is that if you're good at what you do, if you're a good lawyer, this is only going to make you so much better. It's just going to really, and he says, what people don't realize is the verticalization of AI, which is really what's happening. It's not this, it is societal changing, but it's beginning in the verticals, right? So for counsel, what it means, if you're a good lawyer, you're a good talker, you can, you're good, you're likable, you've got good EQ, you're going to love it. The people that should be concerned are the ones that are basing all of their self-worth on the mechanics. I know these 5 things. I'm really good at these 5 things. Good for you. AI is going to pass you right now. Where are you? So but I'm heartened by most people are looking at this in a very different light. They're saying, let's just get in there. Let's learn. Right. That's what's happening more. And what my guy says is, Renn, if you're good at what you do, no matter where you are in your verticals, you're going to love this. It's going to be an extraordinary next 5 years for you as that really good person at whatever task you're good at. Right?
It's so exciting. I mean, it's such a positive thing. What about if you just think like your starting point here is really low? So sometimes people kind of have this myth, right, that you're sort of born a great communicator. I know that not to be true because I was so bad when I started, and I'm now up to hopefully mediocre or somewhere. But like, what if you just think you're terrible? Like, can you learn this? Can you really become great?
Oh, of course. You got to get past yourself. This idea of ego, self-interest, and ambition. The big problem in the world is those 3 things are great. They drive us, but they also just totally distort us, right? We have to get past the ego problem. We just have to get past it. And the way to do that is what I did when I was back in my teens is I would constantly say to myself, it's not about you. It's not about you. So anytime I was going to walk into a room, I would literally say out loud, it's not about you. And then that just forced me into this external thinking, right? So it's definitely learnable. The thing that gets in the way is us, this flawed creature, right? But yeah, no, it's just a matter of respecting it, wanting to learn, jumping in. And then I jokingly say this. I say, if you really want to become a great communicator, have children. Just have kids. And if you can't have kids, go adopt some or go and take on your nephews and nieces and then see how well you get along with them as they get through the teen years. Because that forces you to live in this world. Particularly in my case, I have a daughter, and my daughter has taught me so much. She's now 35 years old, and we're very close. But we're close because she taught me how not to be a male asshole.
Which is a valuable skill.
Yes.
As I think we all need to learn. Awesome. Renn, so you spoke at our conference last year, and again, people loved this, and they said, well, actually, this is a topic which isn't really taught about. We just had our last conference, and we had a keynote on mental health. So everyone said, well, you should do a keynote on AI, and we said, yeah, maybe. And we got Anne-Marie Carvalho, who's an amazing coach and therapist, right, in the space of mental health for lawyers. And so many people there were super burned out, struggling with imposter syndrome, struggling with kind of, this kind of impossible task of having like an amazing personal life and like doing everything at work and succeed. And just everyone just like, there's a lot of pain among that community. Like, how should we all be taking better care of ourselves?
Mhm. Well, first of all, realize you're not alone. I mean, we're having something societally that I've never seen in my life, and that is, I think it's a general malaise everywhere. Everybody is struggling with this confusion about how can I be this but also that in the length of time you're asking me to do it. It's just all those kind of things. And I love Gen Z actually, because Gen Z is challenging us on all of these now. They're saying, why do it the way you did it? I think it's idiotic, right? And they're challenging us to take another new look at ourselves. So I actually think it's, like anything in the world, we're so resilient as a creature. We adjust and we will get through this and we will become something better on the other end, because that's just the way it always works. We end up going through it. It's painful. And then we somehow come out. So I'd say on self-care, get to the basics. It's like in sport. What do you do if you have a sports team that's in trouble? You get to the fundamentals, right? And what are the fundamentals? Drink water, get your sleep, exercise, right? Do that stuff first. It's the idea of getting up in the morning and making your bed. It sounds crazy. Do it, right? Clean your house, clean out a closet. On those very superficial levels, get that done. And it's amazing how it really helps you in your brain. On this topic, actually, I don't know if anybody's ever seen this book, The Ethics of Ambiguity.
I have seen it. Yeah, I was a philosophy undergrad.
Okay, so
I'm impressed with myself that I've seen that one.
Yeah, well, I just finished it, and as I was explaining to my daughter about this, I said I had to read it 3 times while I was reading it. So I'd go through a chapter, and then I'd take my little card, and I would put it back at the top of the chapter. So the next day I would read it again, because it's that. But this goes to this issue of right. It's very relevant to now, because we're living in a time where there's 2 right answers to the same question, and we're like, which do I choose? How do I move forward, right? And it's happening on a personal level. It's happening on a governmental level. It's happening societally. It's a real challenging time to be functioning in work, in life, and family. No question.
I mean, we obviously see a very narrow slice of this, right, in our customers. But, the kind of traditional narrative of become a lawyer, go and work for a big firm is really shifting. And you see this because the firms are all putting up their salaries for junior lawyers, which is the way you try and get people in who don't necessarily want to go into it. And so there's a lot of just like rethinking, really fundamental level, like what do you want from this job? Why do you want this job? Like, what are you going to get from it? And it is definitely shifting like really rapidly. And so it's something a lot of legal teams.
Those are great questions. I mean, that we should all be asking ourselves those questions, no matter where we are in the stage of life, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, you've been a founder, right? And I should imagine founding something for you is as challenging as for everyone, which is, it's a unconventional thing. If you ask your parents, what should I do? They typically don't say found a company, right?
No. Quite the opposite. Yeah.
Awesome. Just coming up to time on this, I wanted to end with just a few actionable tips that folks can take away here. Yeah. So, you're an in-house lawyer. You're kind of working up in an exec team. Like, what are your top 3 tips for them on making sure they're communicating effectively and having impact?
Yeah, I think most lawyers, counsel are good at this, but the idea is understand the context you're living in. Just assess it, right? What does the boss, your immediate boss, expect? And what does your boss's boss expect, right? Up to the founder, whatever that is. Consider all of that, right? Know that your discipline, your promises you make, and your accountability is what they're judging you on above all else. Like if you say, I'm going to get this done by Monday afternoon at 12, you better damn well do that. You can't come later and go, oh, I didn't get it done. I'll get it done by 2. No, they judge you on the practicals when you're at a certain level. As you grow, as you get the next level, they start judging you differently. They start looking at, are you making cogent arguments? Are you taking into account the world you're living in? And then as you get to the very top, you've got to live in strategy. You've got to live in the business of the business. You better understand what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening competitively and all that. So I think you just have to, first of all, get your context. Know what body of water am I swimming in? And then adjust to that body of water, whatever that is. And then as you move up, you'll find that that body of water changes slightly. And so often it's practical enough, but it's the idea that, I remember my first job was I was a congressional aide on Capitol Hill in Washington. Now you can imagine, I'll never forget when I showed up, my onboarding was they handed me a children's book on how laws are made. They literally handed us, he said, Renn, that's all we can tell you. The rest of it, you got to just do it. And so for 4 years, I had to figure out, oh my God, you have to navigate lobbyists. You have to navigate chairmen of committees, subcommittees. You have to navigate the White House. You got to navigate your member and his stupidity or his, where he's smart and where he's dumb. That taught me so much about multitasking and being able to look at that context and assessing what can do you damage, what cannot, and what is the expectation. And you'd be amazed if you just get the basics done and at the level that you are, understand what their expectations are and what their motivations are, satisfy them, do them rhythmically, and then over time, it all makes sense, right? That's practical?
Yeah, super practical. And one of my big takeaways, I think, from our discussion today is kind of like, don't sit back and wait for someone to teach you, right? This kind of journey of self-learning that you went on, in the end, you've got to take responsibility and figure it out.
That's right. But because, like you and I both are founders, we had no choice. You're asked to grow at a level that's unrealistic, right? You're going from one conversation to the next. It makes you have to jump these high things. It's horrible in the early moments, right? But that self-investment and owning your own progression, whether you're inside of a corporation, your GC, whatever you are, own it. And don't be pointing fingers. Truly say, what have I done to contribute to this problem? How can I fix that? And that's that, that whole stoic thinking idea. I can impact that which I can impact and ignore everything else. It's brilliant, Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, that's a book everybody should carry with them wherever they are, because it fundamentally hits all this, right? Don't care so much about the assholes in the world. Try to figure out how you cannot be one of them, right? That's the agenda.
I love it. Renn, we've had a really fascinating discussion today. It's been particularly refreshing to kind of step out of deeply technical topics into some of these more fundamental things around how you build resilience and how you can communicate well as an executive in a company. So thank you so much for being here. How can folks find out a bit more about your work?
I mean, frankly, just go to LinkedIn and look. My name is so weird, Renn Vara. I come up first. It's the benefit of that name, and then just ping me. I'm very much a reader. I respond to email. You ping me. You'll get me, and I respond to it because I love startups. I love startup founders. My wife and I just made a decision that we live with 20 and 30-year-olds and love it, and just we respect them, and and we love that they're creating a world. I mean, so for us, it's a massive turn on. So just ping me through LinkedIn and we'll find a way.
So if you're a founder, if you're a lawyer looking for help on this topic, get in touch with Renn. And Renn, thanks so much again for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks, Richard. Thanks for including me.